Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a retired hydrologist buys 120 acres of swampy Louisiana land for peace and solitude, he doesn't expect a ruthless HOA to steal it for suburban dreams. But when the rain starts and the houses sink, he lets nature do the talking. This is how silence became the loudest revenge. When I first bought the land, it wasn't for prestige or profit. It was because I wanted silence. 120 acres of it, to be exact, a stretch of northern Louisiana where the cypress trees outnumber people and the frogs sing louder than any passing car. Half of it was seasonal wetland, the kind that turned soft and breathing in spring. The other half was old pine and hardwood, high enough to stay dry most years. To me, that balance was perfect. I'm not the kind of man who fears a little mud. My name's Marion Braid. I'm 53 years old, a retired hydrological engineer, and I spent the better part of 3 decades mapping groundwater systems for universities, contractors, and, occasionally, the federal government. That land was more than just a place to live. It was a soil profile, a cross-section of memory, data, and peace. I marked every boundary myself, walked them with a GPS and a thermal scanner in the dead heat of summer, logged subsurface conditions, photographed soil compositions, and even brought in a pair of geology grad students from Baton Rouge to build a full stratigraphic map of the area for a small grant project. That map was signed, notarized, and archived. I had topographic overlays, floodplain classifications, and hydrologic risk reports going back 6 years. Not because I expected trouble, but because that's what I do. My neighbors to the south were less interested in maps. Willow Estates, a tidy grid of identical homes governed by a homeowners association that operated with the zeal of a miniature regime. The kind of place where stepping 2 inches over your lawn line might result in a printed citation folded under your windshield wiper. A few years back, they tried to annex part of my property into their planned expansion zone. Their board at the time sent me a glossy brochure titled Imagine the Future that showed my northern grove turned into 12 narrow lots with synthetic turf and optional gazebos. I replied with a cease and desist and a scanned copy of my deed with a personal note. Imagine this going to court. They backed off, though not graciously. Since then, relations were distant, polite when absolutely necessary. That all changed when Karen Luther took over as HOA president. Karen wasn't the kind of woman who tiptoed into power. She bulldozed her way in with a Chanel bag and a press release. 40-ish, eyes like a raptor, smile like a marketing pamphlet. She'd been the PR officer for the previous president, and I suspect she'd been planning her era long before the position opened. Within weeks, Willow Estates had a redesigned website, a drone tour, and a new slogan, Expanding the Dream. Billboards appeared on the county road with mock-ups of pastel houses lined up against an edited photo of my forest, complete, with cheerful families grilling imaginary burgers on decks that didn't exist. I didn't say anything. Not yet. I kept to my patterns. Every morning I walked the south fence line, or what should have been one. A few years back, a storm had taken down a section of split-rail barrier, and I'd never bothered to rebuild it. There wasn't a need. The land itself made a better border than any fence. No sane developer builds on swamp fringe. But when I reached the boundary that February morning, I saw something new. Survey stakes. Orange plastic caps with tags that read WE Phase 2, Lot 3. 3 of them driven into mud I knew well. Land that squelched under your boots and smelled of sulfur when it got warm. The next day, I brought out my old drone. Flew it low and slow. The feed showed cleared paths, poured gravel, a small construction trailer, and fresh lumber stacked in neat rows. 2 men in hard hats stood over a foundation mold, pouring concrete into temporary forms that bled water like a sponge. It didn't take an expert to know what would happen next. But I was one anyway. I tagged the video with a timestamp and saved the footage. Then I went back inside and made coffee. Over the next 3 weeks, I watched them frame out 3 houses. 2 were raised slightly on concrete slabs that sat no more than 10 inches above grade. The third, inexplicably, was flush to the earth, as if pretending the water table didn't exist. Karen herself appeared on site several times in heels and a blazer, gesturing confidently while holding printed brochures. I caught her name on a local news clip talking about the bold expansion of Willow Estates into untouched natural serenity. They had no permits filed with the parish for my land, no boundary confirmation, just confidence and hubris. Still, I didn't call anyone. Not yet. Instead, I printed out the drone photos, stapled them to copies of my deed, my soil report, and the original subdivision rejection paperwork. I placed the folder in my file cabinet under a tab labeled HOA, Phase 2, Wet Grave. And I waited. The first real rain came in late March, not the heavy spring deluge, just a warm-up act, but even that was enough to start the whisper. My land is old land. It remembers water like it remembers war, and the low parts breathe it in like a lung. That first shower softened the soil in ways the Willow Estates construction crew clearly hadn't anticipated. From my kitchen window, I watched one of their dump trucks try to reverse into the new build zone and get stuck half an hour trying to crawl back to gravel. By the time they got it loose, the tires had dug a twin rutted trench deep enough to grow rice in. I didn't wave. I just filmed. In early April, the big rain started. The kind that falls sideways, hammer your tin roof until it sounds like drum fire, and leave everything smelling like copper and rot. I stood on my front porch with coffee and a field scope, watching as the slab foundations of the Willow Estates expansion began to shimmer, water creeping in from underneath, turning the compacted gravel beneath into a kind of pudding. They kept working. I have to hand it to them. They were committed, or oblivious, probably both. On the third house, they managed to get the frame sealed and the siding halfway done before the first walls started to shift. I caught it on drone footage, a faint creak as the lower right corner of the structure bowed outward just enough to crack the trim boards. The workers paused, stared, shrugged, and went back to nailing fascia. That same evening, I received a flyer in my mailbox, a printed, glossy trifold brochure titled Willow Estates Phase 2 Grand Opening. Reserve your slice of serenity. It was addressed to current and future community partners, which I assumed was HOA code for people whose land we're building on. It included computer renderings of houses standing tall among trees they hadn't planted, and wildlife that sure as hell didn't live here: a deer, a fox, and what looked suspiciously like a Maine moose. The bottom corner read, "Only 3 units left. Financing options available." I poured myself a whiskey. On week 4, a row of landscapers arrived. They planted 5 imported crepe myrtles along the eastern edge of what I knew was still my property. They installed a cheap PVC pipe drainage line running downhill toward a low pocket I'd seen hold 4 feet of standing water in past years. One of them even waved to my drone. That week, I added new labels to my evidence folder: illegal drainage, encroachment, east line, and tree line shift. I began mapping surface runoff using elevation overlays. The situation wasn't just bad, it was textbook catastrophic. And they were doing it fast, like speed would outpace the laws of gravity and fluid dynamics. Karen showed up again around this time with a man in a blue blazer and jeans, realtor type. He shook her hand, nodded a lot, gestured at the houses, and once actually stepped off the gravel path and sank his polished shoe ankle-deep into the wet loam. He looked at her in horror. She just laughed, said something, and they walked off. By now, the framing on all 3 houses was done. Plywood sheathing, low-end insulation rolls, roof shingles already curling in the humidity. I counted maybe 30 workers over the course of the next 10 days, hammering, shouting, pumping water out of trenches that filled back up by sundown. At least once I saw a portable generator float 2 feet from where they left it, like a little red raft carrying extension cords. Still, they worked. Still, they sold. At the county office, my lawyer quietly confirmed no official building permits had been filed for construction on my parcel. The HOA had submitted plans for an expansion zone under their own subdivision code, but failed to get a full land use verification. When pressed, they provided internal community approvals, none of which held legal weight. No one had checked my deed. No one had contacted the parish land office. I asked Scott, my attorney, if I should file a cease and desist. He asked, "Are you in a hurry?" I said, "Not at all." Then came the banners. They strung them across the construction entrance. Final phase grand reveal. This May. I watched the plastic letters flap in the wind, reflecting off puddles that were already creeping toward the joists. The whole thing reminded me of a lesson I used to teach in undergrad. You don't fight the swamp, You study it, and if you're smart, you get the hell off of it. But these people weren't students. They were marketers, planners, and suburban expansionists with an Instagram budget and the patience of a caffeinated squirrel. They didn't even know they were building their dream homes in a place the locals had long called the sucking ground. So I waited, and the rains kept coming. The first house didn't fall so much as it gave up. It had been listing slightly for over a week, and I could see from my scope that one of the load-bearing corners had started to dip into what the soil survey marked as Zone B7, high clay saturation, unstable under hydrostatic load. Translation: you try to build there in spring, the earth eats it. I watched as the southeast corner began to sag like a wet sponge, the roofline bending like a shrug. Then came the crack, sharp, short, almost clean, and the whole frame slouched in on itself like it realized it had made a terrible mistake. I had the drone in the air before the dust settled. The footage was surreal. The structure didn't topple. It settled. It pressed downward with the slow agony of a dying animal, boards creaking, siding peeling away, until the entire front porch vanished into the earth like it had never been there at all. Rain pooled around the base like a funeral veil. From my laptop screen, it looked like time-lapse decay, except it was live. I didn't call anyone. By then, local gossip had started to churn. A video of a Willow Estates delivery truck getting stuck in what used to be a driveway had made it onto Facebook. The caption read, "Welcome to Lake HOA." By the end of the day, it had been reshared over 2,000 times. Someone made a TikTok remix of the foundation collapse synced to dramatic opera music. That got picked up by a local satire page, which renamed the expansion The Sinking Dream. I watched it all unfold like a man sitting dry under an awning while the circus tent floods. The HOA, for their part, doubled down. Karen issued a public statement via the Willow Estates website claiming that minor construction issues were being addressed by professionals and that the expansion was still on schedule. She blamed unexpected water table behavior due to recent weather anomalies. I laughed so hard I spilled my coffee. Week 2 of the rains brought the second failure. This time, it wasn't as graceful. The foundation cracked down the center like a dropped plate, snapping PVC pipes and sending water jets into the air like geysers. One of the workers tried to block the spray with a piece of plywood. Another fell knee-deep into a sinkhole that opened near the west edge of the lot. They pulled him out muddy and limping, and I caught it all on drone footage, annotated the incident, and saved the clip under Collapse 2 West Line. Later, I emailed the timestamp to Scott with the subject line, "They're still pretending this isn't happening." The final house held on until the end of the third week. By then, the remaining crew had given up pretending. The interior was visibly sloped. You could see daylight between the wall and the frame in spots. A realtor's sign still stood out front, bent slightly like it was embarrassed. And then, one morning, I watched the back corner just vanish. A glutinous slurp from below, followed by a slow backward lean, and the whole structure sagged into the muck like it was taking a nap in defeat. That afternoon, a news van showed up. I stayed inside, of course, but I tracked the coverage. Local Channel 5 aired a special segment titled "The Estate That Sank: What Happened at Willow Phase 2. It featured overhead drone shots, animated diagrams of theoretical subsidence, and a very polite hydrologist from LSU who all but said, "You built on a damn swamp. What did you think was going to happen?" Then Karen vanished. 3 days. No appearances, no statements. Her HOA assistant, a wide-eyed young man who once emailed me a landscaping complaint for leaving a tree stump unpainted, issued a brief notice saying that President Luther is taking time for personal reflection. Meanwhile, the HOA forums exploded. Homeowners wanted answers. Investors, especially those who had bought pre-sale units, demanded refunds. Someone posted a screenshot of Karen's Zillow page showing she had quietly listed her own house as sale pending. That didn't go over well. And just when I thought the madness had peaked, an envelope arrived. It was hand-delivered by courier. Heavy paper, official-looking seal. Inside was a lawsuit, filed in parish civil court with my full name listed as the defendant. The charges: negligence, failure to warn, willful obstruction of community development, and, my personal favorite, malicious sabotage by omission. According to the attached documents, I had knowingly withheld geological risk information, deliberately failed to erect physical barriers, and allowed preventable damage to occur through calculated silence. I stared at the pages, then laughed. Long, loud, absurd laughter. So hard I had to sit down on the porch steps. I had done nothing, and somehow nothing had become a legal offense. But I didn't laugh for long, because this was war now. The morning after the lawsuit landed on my porch, I drove straight to Scott Melrose' office in town. He had a reputation as the kind of land use attorney who could dismantle a boundary dispute with a single eyebrow raise, and more importantly, he owed me a favor. Back in my university days, I'd helped his younger brother avoid expulsion by proving that the sinkhole under the chemistry lab wasn't the result of a student prank, but a misaligned storm drain and a very dumb construction shortcut. Academic karma, I guess. Scott read the complaint in silence, flipping each page like it was an insult. "You have got to be kidding me," he muttered. "Malicious sabotage. What did they expect you to do, stand in the rain waving warning flags?" He closed the folder with a snap. "They built on your land, without permission, on unstable soil you documented years ago, and now they're blaming you because gravity works." I didn't say anything. I just raised an eyebrow. He smirked. "Let's burn them to the ground." Legally, of course, we got to work. The first step was to compile everything. I gave him the full archive: drone footage, soil maps, timestamps, official floodplain overlays, copies of correspondence from the HOA going back years, the refusal letter from the parish land use office, even the photos of Karen touring the build. Site with her realtor while standing knee-deep in muck. Scott brought in a clerk to scan and cross-reference it all. The pile took up half a table. Next, we countered. Within 48 hours, Scott filed a countersuit against Willow Estates HOA and Karen Luther personally. Grounds: trespass, destruction of protected land, slander, false accusation, and illegal use of private property for commercial gain. He also filed for an emergency injunction to block any further development or cleanup until a formal investigation could be completed. That got their attention. 3 days later, I was served again. This time with a summons to attend a hearing. Not the trial yet, just the first dance. The courthouse was buzzing. Reporters from 2 local news outlets were there, and I caught sight of one guy from a real estate blog who looked like he hadn't been outdoors in years. The gallery was packed. Homeowners, investors, bored retirees with nothing better to do. Karen arrived 10 minutes late, flanked by a trio of lawyers in sharp suits and thin expressions. She looked strained. Hair tied too tight, smile pulled taut like it had been ironed on. When she saw me sitting calmly in the front row, she blinked just once, and I saw it. The realization. I wasn't bluffing, and I wasn't backing down. The hearing was short but fiery. Her legal team tried to paint me as a passive obstructionist, a man who willfully allowed destruction to occur through non-disclosure. They showed maps that conveniently excluded boundary lines, claimed I had opted out of HOA notices, and presented an internal HOA memo suggesting my land had community easement potential. It was word salad laced with arrogance. Then Scott stood up. He started with my deed, a certified copy with coordinates, dates, and 3 signatures. Then came the drone footage. Clip after clip, stamped and labeled, construction, staking, excavation, flooding. Then the university soil report, 6 years old, with color-coded risk zones. Every one of those collapsed houses had been built squarely in red zone, unstable, unfit for foundation. Then the cease and desist letter from 3 years ago. Then the fake expansion map published by the HOA on their own website, where my land had been magically relabeled Expansion Reserve. Then the kicker, a notarized letter from the parish land office confirming no permits had been issued for construction on parcel 18B, which, surprise, was mine. By the end, the judge was squinting over his glasses like he was watching a slow-motion train wreck. Karen tried to speak, but her lawyer cut her off with a palm. The judge ordered a temporary freeze on all HOA expansion activity pending full trial. He allowed our injunction, warned both parties against public escalation, and strongly recommended mediation, which Scott politely declined. Outside the courthouse, the press pounced. I gave no comments, but Scott did, briefly. My client is not the villain here. He is a landowner defending his property, and the evidence speaks for itself. Karen brushed past us without a word, but the way she gripped her phone told me the calls she was about to make weren't going to be friendly. Later that night, someone tossed a rock through the window of my tool shed. Just one. No note. No spray paint. Just a rock. I installed floodlights and 4 more cameras the next morning. Then I filed a police report. They think I'm going to fold. They're wrong. A week after the hearing, I got a letter from a homeowner inside Willow Estates. Handwritten. No return address. Just a note tucked inside a plain envelope, slipped into my gate like some Cold War spy drop. I didn't know it was your land. None of us did. She said the maps were certified. I'm sorry. MW, there was a number at the bottom. I didn't call it, but I saved it. By then, the HOA's ship was leaking fast. The failed expansion was all over local news. Real estate blogs started publishing hit pieces on the rise and fall of Willow Estates Phase 2, and someone dug up a cached version of the original investor pitch deck. It included aerial renders that clearly depicted my property, labeled Luxury Scenic Row. Bold move, labeling stolen land with italics. Meanwhile, Scott was building our formal case like a man possessed. He brought in a geodetic surveyor, a forensic architect, and even an environmental liability consultant. We were going to prove not just that the HOA trespassed, but that they did it knowingly, and that Karen ignored multiple warnings to push a project that was doomed from the moment it touched the mud. It got better. The environmental consultant, an older woman named Rochelle with a glacier's patience and a chainsaw's edge, found emails from a subcontractor who had warned the HOA board about soil instability before they poured a single foundation. The subcontractor had since been fired. Rochelle tracked him down, got a signed affidavit, and 2 days later, we had the smoking gun, an internal memo from Karen herself dismissing concerns as overblown swamp paranoia and instructing the contractor to proceed as scheduled, whether be damned we leaked it anonymously. The story made Channel 8. Karen, now openly hunted by journalists and furious investors, tried to spin it. She posted a video on the HOA site, standing stiffly in front of the collapsed homes in heels and makeup, delivering a grim monologue about unforeseeable terrain shifts, predatory legal action by non-members, and sabotage efforts designed to harm the community's growth. She didn't mention my name, but her eyes practically did. The comment section turned into a bonfire. People were angry, some because they lost money, some because they felt duped, some just liked a good public downfall. More homeowners started reaching out. One sent me photos of HOA meeting minutes, redacted ones with half the budget numbers missing. Another offered to testify that Karen had skipped multiple environmental compliance reviews during the planning phase. One woman, a retired schoolteacher named Lila, came forward with an actual voice recording of a board meeting where Karen said, quote, "If we wait for the ground to dry, we'll lose the whole fiscal quarter. I started to feel like I wasn't the only one fed up with this nonsense." Then came the audit. Apparently, the HOA had received a private loan from a local development fund, about $500,000, contingent on permits that didn't actually exist. When the fund caught wind of the lawsuits and drone footage, they sent in their own investigators. What they found was a holy trinity of incompetence: no permits, no insurance, and half the money spent without documented bids. One invoice was made out to Cash LLC, another to a landscaping company that didn't exist in state records. And the best part? The HOA had been using Karen's home address as the billing contact for all of it. I couldn't have written it better myself. Scott filed an addendum to our case: fraudulent misappropriation of development funds. That's when Karen's lawyers tried to settle. They offered me $75,000 and a signed NDA. Said I could walk away clean, no trial, no press, just a gentleman's agreement. I told them they could stick it in the same swamp they tried to bury my land under. That week, someone tried to hack into my Wi-Fi. Then a car started parking across the road at night. No plates, lights off, idling for hours. I reported it to the sheriff's office. They sent a deputy who sat out with me one night and confirmed it was real, not paranoia. The car vanished after that. I added another camera. Karen was losing her grip, and she knew it. But we weren't done yet. I didn't expect a letter from the Louisiana State Licensing Board to show up in my mailbox, but there it was. Stiff envelope, gold seal, very official. Inside, a notice. Due to multiple complaints and an active investigation, Willow Estates HOA was under formal review for unauthorized development, misrepresentation of land use boundaries, and failure to comply with state environmental codes. Karen was listed as the primary license holder responsible for project authorization. It felt like the sky was starting to fall, but not on me. By then, Karen had stopped appearing in public. Her face vanished from the HOA website. No more video statements. No more ribbon-cutting promises. She'd gone underground, probably hoping to minimize damage until her lawyers could scrounge together a defense that didn't look like wet cardboard. But it was too late. The beast she created was now chewing through its leash. Scott called me in for a strategy meeting. He had printed out a flowchart, looked like a murder board from a crime show, but it mapped every legal offense, witness, contract breach, and complaint we had stacked against the HOA. It was beautiful. "We're not just looking at trespass anymore," he said. "This is a RICO-adjacent conspiracy case now. If we push this to federal court, they won't just owe you money. Karen could face prison." I leaned back. "You think she knows that?" He nodded. "That's why they're panicking." The panic became public within the week. A group of investors filed their own lawsuit against the HOA itself. Turns out, many of them had been assured that all permits were in place, that the land had been cleared by state surveyors, and that environmental reviews were complete. They had emails. They had signed PDFs. They had false maps. Then came the homeowners' revolt. A special emergency meeting was called inside Willow Estates. I wasn't invited, obviously, but word traveled fast. Someone leaked a video, grainy phone footage of the meeting room. Karen standing at the front, arms folded, getting grilled by angry residents. One man yelled, "You dragged us all down with you." Another shouted, "We trusted you with our futures." Then someone threw a rolled-up agenda packet across the room, and a security officer had to step in. The next morning, 5 board members resigned. Later that day, I got another letter, this time from the Parish Development Office. It was a formal apology, not just acknowledgement of what had happened, but a promise to cooperate with our case. They'd launched their own internal review after seeing the news coverage. Apparently, one of the HOA's early survey packages had been submitted to the parish office with doctored signatures from a retired official, a man who had been dead for 3 years. That's how deep the rot went. Scott's face when he read that, worth framing. He sent a motion to the judge to fast-track our case based on overwhelming evidence of fraud, to request that the HOA assets be frozen pending trial, and to seek damages not just for trespass, but for deliberate and coordinated development fraud on a private citizen's land. Then came the best surprise of all. The university I used to teach at, LSU, reached out. One of my old colleagues in the geology department had seen the story and remembered the soil study I'd contributed to all those years ago. They asked permission to use the Willow Estates collapse as a case study in a course on environmental engineering failure. I told them they had my full blessing and access to all my drone footage. They titled the module, "How Not to Build a Subdivision, the Braid Basin Collapse." I printed that email and stuck it to my fridge. But things weren't all victories and headlines. 2 days later, I came home from town and found my gate wide open. The chain had been cut clean through. I pulled the truck up slow, heart ticking faster. The barn door was ajar. My cameras were intact, but the feed had gone dark for almost 90 minutes. Inside the barn, someone had dumped a bucket of mud and broken shingles in front of my old blueprint cabinets. On top was a note written in red marker. "Hope you like watching things fall apart." The sheriff's office took it seriously this time. They logged it as criminal intimidation related to ongoing litigation. A deputy stayed overnight outside the gate. I reinforced the locks. I considered carrying again, because at this point, it wasn't just about property. Karen was unraveling. And something told me she wasn't going down alone. Court day arrived like thunder. Gray skies, wet roads, air thick with humidity, the kind that sticks to your ribs and makes everything feel heavier. Scott and I pulled into the courthouse early, both of us in pressed jackets, no ties. We didn't need to dress like politicians. We had the truth, a file box full of evidence, and a witness list longer than a swamp boardwalk. Karen showed up nearly 40 minutes late. She wore sunglasses inside the building, like that would somehow disguise the chaos she was dragging behind her. Her new legal team looked exhausted. One of them already had his sleeves rolled up like he was bracing for a hurricane. The hearing was to determine 2 things: whether the HOA had trespassed and developed property without legal authority, whether there was sufficient evidence to classify the construction project as fraudulent or reckless under state land use codes. Judge Martha Lantry presided. Older woman, clean haircut, wore readers halfway down her nose and a look on her face that said, "Don't waste my damn time." Perfect. Scott opened with the drone footage. Quiet room. Lights dimmed. High-res projection of 3 homes slowly sinking into the marsh like bloated corpses. Cracked pillars, twisted siding, one roof peeled halfway back like a tuna can. Then came the overlays. Cadastral maps, GPS coordinates, time-stamped overlays showing how far the structures bled onto my land. Judge Lantry didn't say a word, but she didn't blink either. Then we moved into the documents. My deed, on record for over 8 years. The 3D soil instability model from LSU. The emails from the fired subcontractor. The memo from Karen calling soil warnings swamp paranoia. The development grant fraud tied to her home address. Then came the witness statements. Rochelle testified first, cold and precise, like she'd been waiting her whole life to dismantle Karen in a room like this. Then Lila, the schoolteacher, playing the voice recording from the board meeting. One of the most damning lines, "Once it's built, it's too expensive to tear down. We'll make them adapt." When it was Karen's turn to speak, her lawyer tried to pivot, claimed this was a civil misunderstanding, that their mapping data had been incomplete, and that I had failed to erect a clear boundary fence to prevent confusion. Scott stood and sliced that apart in under 90 seconds. No legal statute in Louisiana requires a landowner to fence off their acreage to prevent illegal development by a third party. This is not a grazing dispute. This is large-scale, unsanctioned construction. On mapped, deeded private property, Karen tried to interject. The judge silenced her with a look. Then the final nail. Scott introduced a surprise witness, the land surveyor Karen had originally hired, who had quietly come forward the night before. On the stand, he explained how he warned Karen twice that the plotted boundary line cut into a known floodplain on my parcel. She ignored him. When he refused to sign off, he was dismissed. He had kept the emails and copies of the initial survey logs. We had them all. At that point, Karen looked like a wax figure melting under courtroom lights. The judge recessed for 45 minutes. When she returned, her verdict was brief. The court found Willow Estates HOA and its acting president guilty of unlawful development on private property, gross negligence, intentional misrepresentation, and civil trespass resulting in environmental degradation. She ordered a full financial audit, injunctions against future construction, and immediate assessment of damages. And then she turned to me. "Mr. Braid," she said, "you are awarded damages totaling $4,200,000 plus all legal expenses incurred. The HOA is ordered to dismantle remaining structures and restore the affected land to its pre-development condition. That cost will not fall on you." I nodded, didn't smile, just nodded. And then the real shocker. Judge Lantry held Karen Luther personally liable for professional misconduct and abuse of authority, assigning partial financial burden to her in addition to the HOA. Her assets were frozen pending appeal. Karen didn't even look up. Outside the courthouse, the air broke into rain. Reporters clustered near the steps, but I walked past them. Scott gave a brief statement. I climbed into my truck, turned the engine over, and let the windshield wipers do their thing while I stared straight ahead. 8 years of ownership, 3 months of trespass, 30 minutes of verdict. Justice didn't always come fast, but sometimes it hit like a lightning strike. The storm that broke over the courthouse didn't let up for 2 days. Fitting, I thought, considering the wreckage left behind. Not on my land, but in Karen's once inflated empire. By the time I returned home, the news had spread like floodwater across every local and regional outlet. HOA ordered to pay millions after swamp collapse. President found liable in shocking land fraud case. One article even called it the most expensive mud lesson in Louisiana history. I clipped that one out. It didn't take long for the dominoes to fall. Within the week, Willow Estates held what they called a last emergency session. No chairs overturned this time, no shouting, just a slow collective realization that the HOA was beyond repair. 87% of the members voted for voluntary dissolution. The board resigned in full. The bank accounts frozen. The HOA's remaining assets were ordered liquidated to begin paying off the lawsuit and refunding defrauded investors. Several homeowners put their houses on the market almost immediately. Karen never showed up for the meeting. Rumor was she had sold her own home to cover legal fees and left the state. Someone said they saw her boarding a bus to Dallas with 2 suitcases and a cracked phone screen. No one could confirm it. No one seemed to care. Her name stopped being said in anger. It became a warning. A ghost story whispered in real estate offices. Don't be a Karen Luther. As for me, I didn't spend a single dollar of the awarded compensation for the first 3 months. Not out of modesty, out of principle. I used my time instead to partner with the LSU Environmental Sciences Department. We launched a joint project to monitor seasonal groundwater shifts in flood-prone areas across northern parishes, using my land as the base station. They set up solar-powered sensors, helped replant vegetation to stabilize the soil, and even funded a new drone tower. Then, on my own terms, I created the Reclamation Fund, a legal trust into which I placed $500,000 from the compensation. Its mission: repair and restore any damage done to neighboring properties because of the HOA's recklessness. The same neighbors who once looked past me now showed up with casseroles and shaking hands. "Didn't think you'd do this," one man said. "Didn't think I'd have to," I replied. But maybe the strangest part, the quiet. The land, once clawed by machines, flattened for foundations that never had a right to exist, was silent again. No hammers, no diesel whines, just frogs, crickets, and the occasional rustle of wind through pines. I walked the property each morning with a thermos in hand, sometimes stepping over warped boards half sunk in earth, like the bones of a failed invasion. One morning, I found a small sign wedged under a fallen branch. Weather-worn, splintered. It read, "Future site of Willow Estates, Phase 3. I leaned down, pried it out of the muck, and slung it into the burn barrel out back. It caught flame fast. Pine tar and shame make excellent kindling. In April, the parish held its annual Civic Awards banquet. I didn't attend, not my style, but they mailed me a plaque anyway. Citizen Defender of Land Rights. I hung it in the barn next to my first USGS soil map from 1989. People asked if I regretted not stopping the construction earlier. I told them no, because sometimes the best way to deal with rot isn't to shout about it. It's to let it sink under the weight of its own arrogance, in full view of everyone, so it can't crawl back up pretending to be something clean. My land remembers what was built, but it remembers what was lost even more. And as far as I'm concerned, it reclaimed every inch of itself, the only way it knew how.